Jimmy, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, so my name's Jimmy Dale. I work for the Church of England, and I have a rather impressive sounding title, too impressive if you ask me the truth, where I'm the National Youth Evangelism Officer. So basically, I oversee youth evangelism for the Church of England.
That's pretty cool. My next question is a classic: tea or coffee?
Oh, now I'm a coffee snob, so are we talking proper coffee?
I don't know. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, because I mean, if it's granulated, then I'm not having that.
Yeah.
I think for like day in day out, I'm more of a tea person, but I do like a nice cup of coffee. True story. The best cup of coffee I've ever had was at Lambeth Palace. I had a meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury. I'm just going to leave that little name drop right there. So one of the guys who works with him quite a lot is a guy called Chris. And Chris said, I'll make you a cup of coffee. And he made me this coffee, and it was the best coffee I've ever had. I was like, oh my word, Chris, this is incredible. What is this coffee? And he had about 10 different coffees at home, and he put them into little see-through bags. And so he didn't know which coffee it was. So to this day, the best coffee I've ever had was at Lambeth Palace, and I have no idea what it was. And that makes me very sad. But yeah.
That is very sad. Are you sure the Palace didn't kind of up the taste of the coffee?
Maybe. I mean, drinking coffee in a palace is always a strong start. But
pretty nice, yeah. Amazing. And another little getting to know you question. What awkward situation do you seem to find yourself in a lot, and why?
So I don't have a great memory. So my wife always says that I have about 6 stories, and I just tell them on repeat. And normally people are very polite and they'll just nod along. But quite frequently I will find myself saying the same thing to the same person. And there are some of my friends now who know me well enough that they will just cut in and be like, no, you've told us this 4 times. I'm not sitting through it again. So yeah, that happens a little bit too frequently. I think I'm just really excited about whatever the story is.
Yeah, passionate.
Yeah, passionate. Let's go with that. That's a good word.
Talking of passionate, this is going to segue beautifully into the main topic of this interview, which is your passion for evangelism and youth evangelism. So what does it kind of mean to be an evangelist?
Yeah, so evangelism, especially evangelist, I think evangelist is one of those words that for lots of people, I think they think of it as quite a big, scary thing. That unless you're kind of Mike Pilavachi or Jay John and you stand on a stage in front of 10,000 people and you say, if you want to give your life to Jesus, I want you to come to the front. That's what an evangelist means. Or you're the kind of crazy person stood outside the station yelling at people about how they're going to hell. So evangelism is it's an old Greek word. It basically means to bring good news. And exactly what we're talking about is to be so excited about something that it kind of you naturally share it. So I'm a runner. I really like running. There's only two sorts of people who like running and people who really don't like running and don't like people talking about running. It doesn't faze me which of those groups you're in. I'm still going to try and talk to you about running. And I'm not just going to talk to you about running. I'm going to encourage you to run. I'm going to offer to run with you. I'll try and hook you up with other people who run. But that's because it's something which I'm so passionate about that I want to share that with others. Ultimately, I'm an evangelist for running. I'm also an evangelist for Apple products. I'm an evangelist for Tottenham Hotspur. But I think the key thing is that we're called to be evangelists for Jesus, that we should be so passionate about what it is that Jesus has done when he died on a cross and rose again, that he gives us a clean slate, he gives us a fresh chance to start over. That, I mean, firstly, if that doesn't excite us, then I think I'm not sure we've grasped it properly. But when we have, that should excite us so much that evangelism is just wanting to share that with people. So yeah.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be a scary thing, right? Because it's just, even though it is, it should just be natural.
Yeah.
Like you don't shut up about running.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think we've done an incredible job of being our own best critic, in as much as that we kind of write a narrative in our head about how people view our faith. And it's never positive. Like, we're convinced that everyone, if they found out that we were a Christian, would think we were a right weirdo, and they're never talk to us again. And actually, they'd be super judgmental about everything that we believe. And therefore, the best thing I can possibly do is never talk about it ever and have some friends, because I don't want to be the social pariah at school who sits on my own. But actually, I mean, like, there's been lots of research which has been done over the kind of last 10 years or so. And one of the big things that it's found has been that young people are more up for talking about faith than they ever have been at any other point. And the person who they want to hear about it from is they want to hear about it from you. So I went to New York a couple of years back, and one of when going to New York, the people who I should have spoken to was the New York Tourist Board. They are the official voice of like New York and where to go, and I'm sure they would have given me loads of really great information, but I did not contact them. Instead, I went on TripAdvisor, and Gary from Milton Keynes said, you know what, you really need to go at the Rockefeller Center. Don't bother with the Empire State Building, go at the Rockefeller Center, much better view. Guess what? Went up the Rockefeller Center. Because there's something about hearing somebody who feels and looks like me say something which actually carries a lot more weight. And then Sue, who's in my office, she'd been to New York, and she said, oh, you know what? I tried the best steak ever when I was in New York. It's right over in Hell's Kitchen. I'll give you the name of it. I walked past 22 steak places to get to this steak place. And that steak was incredible. Like, it was a really good steak. But the reason why I went there rather than any of the 22 steak places that I walked past on the way was because Sue had said that it was worth going to. And ultimately, I know Sue and I trust her, and yeah, sure, I'll go there. And so I think sometimes we discredit how much weight our own word has, that ultimately if our friends are actually our friends, then they care about every element of our life. And so if you say anything with enough conviction that actually, you know, this is a genuine part of who I am and what I think, then actually people will be interested. People will walk past 22 steak places because actually the steak that you're talking about might be more exciting, and they're going to trust you on that advice.
Yeah, and they want to hear it from you rather than Wikipedia or someone that they don't actually know. And then that kind of leads into my next question, which is like, so maybe there's people watching who talk to their friends about Jesus the way that they talk to their friends about football or baking or whatever it is. And what would you say to people who kind of would already be doing youth evangelism? And also, what would you say to those who perhaps have a faith in Jesus but wouldn't call themselves youth evangelists?
I think for those who are sharing their faith, so I'm part of a running club, and one of the guys, so obviously I work for the Church of England, so that's normally a conversation topic, like kind of which comes up quite quickly, like what do you do as a job? And one of the guys was like, oh, just to let you know, I'm an atheist, so don't believe any of that. And then a couple of weeks later, we were running together, and he said, I was reading something in the newspaper about your guys, and I wondered, what do you think? And it dawned on me when I got home that what he was actually asking me was not what did I think, but he was asking, what do Christians think? Because I was the first physical person who he knew who was an actual Christian. And so suddenly his narrative on what it looked like to be a Christian was written by me rather than by what he read in the newspaper or what he saw online or whatever else. And so I think my big encouragement for people who are sharing is almost the way that you portray what it means to be a follower of Jesus will trump anything else that's going on. But in that space, you also need to be aware that you are the voice of Jesus in that situation. And so it's not the space to shy away or think, oh, I'm sure that if they're interested, they'll figure it out. I think, yeah, Jesus calls us to go to the ends of the world. So the people who we hang out with all the time isn't exactly the ends of the world. And so having the boldness in those places to be able to share our faith in a regular way, I think is really key. But being aware that actually the impact of how you share your faith probably is far more significant than you think it is. And for people who don't, I mean, I'd say try. That would be my biggest thing. I think if you're, and this sounds incredibly harsh, but my question would be, if you're not sharing your faith, why not? Is it that you're embarrassed about your faith? Is it that you don't really believe it? And because either of those are absolutely fine. Like if you're embarrassed about it, or you don't really believe it. But I think a really key place to start is to be really honest with yourself about it. And if you genuinely think that neither of those are the case, and you're still not sharing your faith, then if you genuinely believe, there was Penn and Teller, the kind of famous magician duo. He once said, so he's not Christian, but he said, if you genuinely believe that there is a heaven and a hell, and you believe that because I don't believe in Jesus, I'm going to hell, and you choose not to tell me, either you don't believe what it is that you're saying, or you're a truly evil person. And it doesn't have to be that you're going to stand there and monologue at them for half an hour. Like literally just leaving little breadcrumbs as you go. So when people go, how was your weekend? Do you talk about the football result, or do you say, oh, I went to church and you know what, it was really great? And you know what, no one might bite on that. No one might say anything. That's absolutely all right. One of the things which I love doing is I was listening to a great podcast, or I was reading a really great book recently. Again, coming back, people love a personal recommendation. I was watching a really great show the other day. People will latch onto that. Mm-hmm. And book I use all the time. I was reading a really great book the other day, and people go, oh, brilliant, what was the book? And if it's a kind of Christian book, suddenly people are like, you can see it kind of takes people a little bit back. It's like, well, I've not heard of that. What's that about? And again, I think it's when you start to step out like that, you start in your mind to break down all the preconceptions and ultimately that negative narrative that we talked about around what people think about your faith, that you realize that actually people don't run a million miles and never talk to you again, that actually like either they want to talk to you about it or they're just pretty ambivalent about it. They're like, great, it's good for you, let's crack on. But either way, at least then you know that you've shared something of who Jesus is, because if you don't, who's to say that there's anyone else in their life who's going to do that?
Oh, yeah, that was just straight facts for 5 minutes. That was amazing. And like, I guess about just like sharing with others, so much of the negative stigma is in your head. Well, I know for me, when I'm talking to my friends, like so much of the fear is just completely unfounded. And because I think in our culture today, we're painted a picture that everyone hates Christians and everyone hates the church. And I don't think that's true at all. And it's just, starting conversations. And then kind of thinking about why we should evangelize and how practically to do it. Obviously, at the moment, we can't invite our friends physically to church, and it might be a little bit harder to like bring them to youth or whatever. How do you think evangelism's going to look in like this kind of COVID and then also post-COVID season?
I think we've done an incredible job in the work in the church so we talk about peer-to-peer evangelism, which is when you share your faith with your friends.
Okay.
And I think we've done an incredible job of facilitated evangelism and peer-to-peer invite evangelism. They're kind of two different phrases. But essentially the idea is, I don't quite trust you to share your faith properly. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put on an event, and your job, like literally all you have to do is just get your friend to this event, and I'll do the work. Okay. I'll do the best sermon you've ever heard, and we'll have the best worship you've ever heard. And in that place, Jesus will come. But your job is just to get your friend there. And I think, you know what, there are millions of people who have come to faith because of stuff like that. So I don't want you to hear me that stuff's bad, but I think like that's really hard to do now, a bit like what you were saying. I think that there's still some openness towards it, that, you know what, it's really easy at the moment to say to people, like, our church is doing something on Sunday, like it's on YouTube, do you want to watch it? I'll send you a link. And you know what, they might do it, they might not, that's fine. But at least you've asked. And actually the thing about it is that there's an anonymity to it, that they can come and no one knows they're there. So like all the kind of statistics say that the number of people viewing church services is way up, because I think that you can kind of, no one knows you're there, you can do it secretly. And so I think on that front it's great. But I think it massively changes the way that we do evangelism, because it shifts from there being special people who have the ability to share faith to actually, if you believe this stuff, it's kind of down to you now. Like one of the things which I've loved has been so Youth Alpha have seen the number of Youth Alpha shoot through the roof. And the thing which is really interesting about it is that they're not the kind of traditional alpha model, which is where you bring your friend and you sit quietly in a small group and somebody else will lead the small group and you really hope that they ask the right questions or whatever else. That instead you say to your friend, I'm going to watch this video series. Do you want to watch it with me? And then we can have a chat about it afterwards. And that feels super scary, because there's no defense there. It's you and it's your friend, and we watch a video and then we have a chat about it. But a bit like what we were saying earlier, that your friend cares about what you think, and actually they probably have got a whole bunch of questions. We were talking before we started recording about the stuff that people kind of want to talk about, but there's not the space to talk about it. And one of the things that I've seen hugely over the last couple of years is that they talk about it like emotional illiteracy, that for lots of young people, that they've got a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings, but one of the biggest issues is they have no idea how to express that. They've got no idea kind of, I've got this question, I want to ask it, but I don't just want to be like, hey guys, anyone thought about this weird thing? Because I look like a bit of a weirdo. It feels there's a lot of vulnerability involved in that. But if you raise that question and I get to just chime in as part of a discussion, then I'm all up for that. And so I think, I come back to the original question, I think post-COVID, one of the big things is going to be, how do we see more people, instead of saying, can I bring my friend to something? And if there's not something there, then I'm not going to do it. And instead saying, actually, what are the ways where I can begin a conversation with my friend, whether that's with Youth Alpha videos or whether that's with something else, but something which essentially is just as simple as that. Like, let's find a way where we can start a conversation so you can ask some of those questions that you probably want to ask anyway, but you can do that in a safe way.
Yeah. And I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be, I think something that's held me back in the past, and I think the same with some of my friends, is it's very nice to invite people to something, to watch a really amazing speaker who kind of has all the answers and can answer all the questions. But then when it's just peer-to-peer, it's a little bit harder, because there's a lot of things that, my friends ask me and I don't know the answer to. So how would you say kind of navigating that aspect of peer-to-peer evangelism when you don't feel like you know what to say?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is, I don't know is a perfectly valid answer. Mm-hmm. I think there's an assumption that kind of, unless we have the answer to every single question that anyone might ever throw at us, and we're able to answer it perfectly, that the entire Christendom is going to fall to pieces and that person will never enter the a church again. That's not how it works. I mean, I always think there's even a bit which you can add on the end of that. I don't know, but I'd love to chat a bit more about this. So I'm gonna have a dig around and I'm gonna see if I can find some stuff about it, and maybe we can chat about it again. And actually, because sometimes those conversations, they're like, you don't plan them. Like, do you want to have a conversation about Christianity? Yeah, tell you what, let's have it next Tuesday at 4. Like, it comes up naturally as part of a conversation.
Yeah.
But then you have that moment where you're a bit like, right, we had this one-off freak conversation. How do I go? Do you remember when we had that weird chat about Christianity? Let's do that again. But actually, if someone says, what about this? And you go, I don't know. And you go, but I'll go away and I'll have a look and I'll see what I think about it. And then you go and you watch some videos or whatever else. And then you come back, you're able to say, remember when we were chatting about that? I watched a really interesting video about that the other day. Or like, I read this great blog, I'll WhatsApp it to you. That there's all kinds of ways where you're able to kind of reignite that conversation again. So in some ways, I don't know, can actually be one of the biggest, almost motivate, things which helps you in your evangelism, even though somehow in our head we think that it's a barrier. I think as well, when we say I don't know, it makes it so much more human. I think that a lot of the time people's perception of Christians is that you have to be good enough for Jesus, and actually the Christian faith is that Jesus is good enough and we're not, and that we need Jesus. And it's really hard when we basically prop ourselves up by going, I need to be good enough to talk about Jesus so I can persuade my friend that I'm good enough to be a Christian. Because that almost is so counter to what we believe in general about in our faith. So yeah, I think that vulnerability is really key. And there's loads of, if you're one of those people who likes to have a think about stuff like that, there is so much stuff out there. There's an amazing series. So if you search for Reboot, it's an apologetics in a pre-COVID world. It used to be an event, but loads and loads and loads of videos from people who are way, way smarter than any of us, and just kind of tackling a bunch of those questions. They do it in a couple of minutes. But things like that, I mean, if you're someone who doesn't like to go in super unprepared, then watching things like that will help, maybe give you a bit of confidence. But yeah, I think my biggest bit of advice is I don't know is a perfectly valid answer.
Mm-hmm. But what we do know is how our own relationship with Jesus is, and our own faith. And that's actually a lot, I guess, what our friends want is to have what you have. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the thing which I always say is the question which everyone is always asking, whether it's the actual words that come out of their mouth or not, is what difference does following Jesus make practically in your life? And ultimately, if the answer to that is no difference whatsoever, then again, I would say maybe you need to have a little bit of a check in the mirror, because actually following Jesus should be making a difference in every area of your life. But that's the question people are asking. What is the difference?
Yeah, that's great. And kind of as a church as a whole, did you want to talk a little bit about how evangelism might look a little bit different, and kind of moving on from COVID? Are there any lessons that you think the church needs to learn? Or because I know you're in the Church of England, so I think as far as it goes, I was in a meeting actually earlier on, and somebody put their finger on it, that we've done an incredible job. It's the parable of the sower. So if you don't know, it's kind of a parable that Jesus tells. So a guy who goes out sowing seed, and he's kind of picking it up and he's lobbing it out all over the place. And the Bible says there's kind of 4 different places that it lands. So some of it lands on the rocks and it's eaten by the birds. Some of it lands in shallow ground and it comes up, but it hasn't got roots, and so it just kind of dies.
some of it kind of grows up, but then it gets tangled by the weeds, and some of it grows and becomes proper corn and stuff. And he's using it as an analogy for like the different ways that kind of people engage with faith. And they put their finger on it, that we've done an incredible job of sharing our faith in a way that is ultimately shallow ground. There's an old phrase which is kind of kicked around in youth work, that a lot of the time we worry that Jesus isn't interesting enough. So we think we'll make up for it and I'll be interesting enough. And then I'll try and tuck Jesus in on the end. And actually what we're seeing now in COVID is that you've got lots and lots of very shallow ground. Somebody else was talking about it's almost like we're going into hibernation, except for when a bear goes into hibernation, it will eat for months and months and months beforehand. We've got a whole bunch of young people who are going into hibernation, and they just haven't eaten anything. And so, I mean, I think the bigger challenge to the rest of the church is when we look at what we do with young people, what's the stuff that is going to enable them to put down deep roots or have enough food for hibernation, or whatever analogy you want to use. And that, I mean, that's the stuff we know. That stuff is like, it's getting into the Bible. It's having a prayer life. It's talking to your friends about your faith. That's the stuff that I think is the make or break, really. And I think what we'll see kind of as we come out of post-COVID is that the places where that has happened, and I think in lots of cases, it's not going to be the whole youth group. It's going to be like 5 or 6 people in the youth group where actually, you know what, that faith is really deep. And it's almost going to be a kind of having to start again, that you're going to have to kind of almost build that culture from that group. Because I think for lots and lots of young people, the kind of the substance just isn't there. That we've been coming along because it was fun to play some games and see my friends, and I really like tuck shop. But at the end of the day, it's our relationship with Jesus which is going to see us through. So I think the bigger challenge for the church is, in this time while we're still seeing young people, how do we really embed that culture? How do we celebrate it in the places where we're seeing it? But ultimately, how do we make that the norm? So that actually that's what young people are striving after, is having a really deep relationship with Jesus, rather than just being the best place to play Among Us or whatever else it is that you choose to do.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And thank you for talking to us. I think that was pretty much all of the questions. Thank you so much.
That's all right. It's been lovely chatting with you.